Hello, everybody across Australia. Welcome to the Mapians annual mid-year review. We've been doing this mid-year review for a few years now. We always do it in June or July. And it basically is just an update on what's been happening. You know, what are some of the trends we're seeing? What are our consultants spending time on with clients? What are some of the areas that employees start to have to look out for, have happened in the past or are likely to happen in the future. So thank you for joining us all today. I'm Belinda Honey. I'm the Chief Workplace Strategist for Mapian. And I've got an excellent team of experts from across our business and across Australia with us today. We've got Sarah Pettit, who's our Chief Migration Agent. So she heads our national migration team. We've got Ben Cooper, who's our Head of Advocacy and Compliance in our IR team nationally. And I do have to say that Ben has literally just slotted into this webinar coming straight from a conciliation conference, I presume, in the Fair Work Commission, Ben. So he only just made it. So
Thanks, Belinda.
too much talk. I hope. Did you manage to conciliate it and get an agreement, or?
Still working on it.
Still working on it, right. Well, thanks for getting here, Ben. We've also got Dr. Leith Middleton, who is our specialist group lead in psychological health and safety. Again, it's a national role, and she's been doing some pretty interesting work in this space with our team nationally. And last but not least is Jamie Patterson, who's our Head of Workplace Strategy based in Southern Region, who sits down in our Melbourne office. So thank you for joining us today. You can't see her, but we also have Jo Berry with us, who's one of our consultants in the Industrial Relations team. And she's going to be monitoring today's session and helping me to ensure that we're responding to as many questions that you have as we can. As we move through the session, I'll be directing some questions to the panelists, but we'd really like to answer some of your questions as well. That's the real purpose of this webinar. So could you please put your questions direct into the Q&A box, not the chat box, but the Q&A box, so that Jo can feed as many of them as possible into the discussion. And any we don't answer, that will enable us, because it's in the Q&A box, to come back to you quite quickly in the next few days with a response to the question if we haven't had a chance to look at it. We've had nearly 400 participants across Australia register for this event, and we know that many of those participants are sitting there in offices and meeting rooms with a couple of other people. So thank you for all of you for making the time to sit and have these conversations with us. So let's get into it. What an interesting financial year it was, the 2024-25 financial year. Anthony Albanese and the Labor government got voted back in. Probably not many surprises there. But Donald Trump also got voted back in and is providing a news cycle like we have never seen before. Sometimes I wish I'd taken some bets on how long his relationship would last with Elon, which wasn't very, very long. And the continual news cycle, I actually quite enjoy it, waking up every morning to see what Donald's been saying on social media overnight. It gives me a good giggle, and I know my 80-year-old mother and I often sit there and have a bit of a laugh and a debate about the things that he's talking about. So it creates an interesting environment. That's one thing to say. Economically, we have started to see the jobs market start to soften a little bit. You know, it's sat at about 4% since early 2024, which is historically very, very low. We've been very lucky in Australia to have that ongoing low unemployment rate. It has started to climb a bit in the last couple of months. In June, it's climbed to 4.3%. So, you know, indications are that the Reserve Bank most likely to soften interest rates as a result of that. So there is a softening in the labour market starting to happen, and no surprises really, considering what's been happening on the economic front. But skill shortages are still huge. I mean, from the perspective of I talk to employers across the country, and it's still probably the biggest item many employers raise with me, the ongoing skills shortages. And it's not across the board, but it's definitely in certain sectors, in certain occupational groups, and has an impact on business, an impact on productivity, etc., etc. And interestingly, immigration isn't slowing down. We probably like to think, and maybe there's not a lot of media about it, but at the crux of it, it's not actually slowing down. The Bureau of Statistics' latest figures show that in May this year that there was actually a record month of migration, with 33,230 permanent or long-term entries into Australia. So the Institute of Public Affairs is predicting that there will be 598,000 permanent and long-term entries into Australia. So while there's been a slowdown in student visas and obviously the softening of the market, employers are still having to look overseas, and we believe will continue to look overseas for quite a while yet, for workers, and entries for skilled workers continue to rise. I just thought I'd highlight just a couple of areas that we sort of keep a bit of an eye on before we get into the discussion with the panelists. One of the ones that I find quite interesting is union density, because a lot of the changes that happened in the Fair Work Act were, you could look at it, part of the reason for it was to try and impact union density and increase union membership across Australia. We don't have the stats yet for 2025, but the latest statistics provided in late 2024 showed that union membership had actually increased from 2022 to 2024. So in this period of the changes that have been coming out, from 12.5% to 14.1%. But this was definitely driven by the increase in the public sector workforce, and you would have seen some media about increasing public sector workers, particularly within the federal government. Interestingly, the private sector decreased again over this period from 8.3 to 7.9%. The other thing that's really interesting is the level of union density across age demographics as well. And in the younger workforces, we're still not seeing a significant uptake in union membership. 15 to 19-year-olds, that's pretty young in the workforce, but 3.7%, 20 to 24-year-olds, 7.3%. But then when you get up to the 55 to 59 and 60 to 64 age groups, you're looking at 20 to 21%. So there's quite a significant difference in terms of age demographics and where union membership is sitting. And just as the final thing, so what are the highest areas of union membership? Education and training sits at 27% in 2024, public administration 23%, and healthcare and social assistance 23%. So from Mappion's perspective, we just keep an eye on this, so it sort of guides what's happening in terms of the legislation and the impacts on those sort of areas. The last one I just wanted to highlight was last year at the webinar, I did talk about how, and I specifically spoke about multi-employer bargaining, and whether it was sort of a move towards back into centralised wage fixing, and wage fixing and relativities within industry. And a lot has happened over the last 12 months, and we're just starting to see some of the impacts of that legislation coming through now with some recent decisions, particularly in the last 4 or 5 months that Ben, I'm sure, will refer to. There's an interesting article, Graham Watson, in the Australian Financial Review on the July 9th. Graham Watson, he's former Fair Work Commission Vice President, now he's a Strategic Counsel at Kinwood Mallesons. And he wrote quite an interesting article following on from the recent BHP decision around same job, same pay. And he stated the return to centralised wage fixing has begun. And he referred to the move by the Keating governments and started by the previous Hawke government away from the institutionalised wages flow on to more of an enterprise autonomy and collaboration in the early 1990s. So that's when we saw the start of enterprise bargaining. He then went on to discuss the impacts of the recent BHP same job, same pay decision and how it is a reversal of that model. And he talks about changes to the Fair Work Act in the first term of the Albanese government did not change the landscape overnight. They provided new avenues to standardise wages and conditions across industries and enterprises, and test cases on multi-employer bargaining as same job and same pay were always going to set the parameters for more widespread applications. And this is now occurring. The same job, same pay avenue is primarily aimed at labour hire arrangements, but the use of very loose language and a broad Fair Work Commission discretion means that it is likely to extend beyond that into other contracting arrangements. And I know, particularly for our clients that we deal with in Western Australia, for example, this is an area of major concern at the moment. So I fully endorse what Graham's saying in terms of it's going to be interesting to see what continues to happen in that area. And it's definitely going to be an area of continued development. There are so many other areas I could start off by talking about, everything from artificial intelligence and the impact on entry-level positions with a son who's coming up towards the end of his degree. What does that mean, for those entry-level graduate positions? The workforce of the future, to the impacts from the USA changes on diversity and inclusion programs. We've had a lot of interesting discussions with clients about that. And the ongoing focus on workplace conduct and culture. And of course, we've got the anticipated productivity roundtable next month, and whether there will be anything arising from that from a workplace perspective and anything that may positively impact labour productivity. Though I'm not really sure how hopeful I am on that, considering the Australian reported yesterday that the National Secretary of the Metal Workers Union, Steve Murphy, has said that there should be a cutting of hours in return for productivity gains. So it's going to be an interesting discussion if that's going to be the focus. But it's time for me to move on, time to hear from our experts and get some of their insights. So what I'm going to do is start by going around and getting each of the panelists just to give a bit of an overview, quick couple of minutes about some of the areas that they have seen happening in their practice areas over the last few months, or the last 12 months. So, Sarah, I'm going to start with you. The mapping and migration team has had its busiest year on record nationally, with the team continuing to grow across Australia to meet the demand of our clients. Can you give us an overview of what your team's working on and what's happening for employers in this area?
Sure, thank you, Belinda. So last year, we were eagerly anticipating the introduction of the Skills in Demand visa that was introduced in December 2024. And now we've been working with that program for the last 8 months. We're now working with 3 tiers within the 482 visa program. We have our specialist skills stream, which is for any occupation except trades, machinery operators, drivers and labourers, as long as the salary is 141,210. We've got our second tier, which is the core skills group, and we've got a new list of occupations called the CSOL, the core skills occupation list. So long as the income is between 76,515 to 141,210, those on the occupation list can also be sponsored under the 482 visa program. The third tier is yet to be developed, but that will take into consideration the essential skills. So we'll see aged care, childcare, and other support occupations fall under this tier. I'll just apologise for my croaky voice. I woke up with a sickness this morning, so I'm just working through that as well. So for the most part, the 482 Skills in Demand visa has been very well received. The specialist skills stream has given us greater access to more occupations, providing the salary threshold is met. 4-year visa term is now available for all sponsored 482 visa holders, which is really great. With the change up to the occupation list, Last year, those that were on the short-term list of occupations could only get a 2-year visa with an option to renew for a further 2 years. So having the ability for employers to sponsor people for 4 years and transition them to permanent residency has been a great game changer. There's also been the reduction to the work experience criteria. So we've gone from 2 years to 1 year in the last 5 years, which has opened up a lot more availability of candidates in the market as well. We have seen faster processing, but I will caveat that. So the department did say that they would try and process the specialist skills stream within 7 days. And while we're seeing some of those applications come through within that period, we are seeing quite a few get caught up, taking anywhere from 40 to 80 days to be processed. The same for the core skills stream. So yeah, just I guess be mindful that with these delays, obviously come delays in your onboarding with the applicant as well. And then we've seen those confirmed pathways to employer-sponsored permanent residency, of which we've seen a massive uptake with the introduction of that in December. So those that were previously on the short-term occupation list who didn't have pathways to remaining here, they can now apply through the employer-sponsored space, which is really exciting. So there's been some really great changes, Belinda. The team, as you said, has been extremely busy. We'll continue to face into that busyness, and we'll probably talk through some more questions later on what key things employers can do to manage those challenges that we're seeing.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Ben, just in terms of your intro, at Mappian, we're pretty, we've been doing industrial relations for over 40 years now, so we're pretty pragmatic about industrial relations. Many of us have seen many iterations of government and legislative changes, but the challenges are always there. And there's some current challenges as well. So can you just give us a bit of an overview of what the IR team has been looking at and some of the challenges our clients have been seeing?
Yeah, thanks, Belinda. Graham Watson's commentary earlier identified what's old is new again. So we're kind of, those of us that have been around in this game for a while have see the cycle repeat and repeat. So certainly the last 12 to 18 months has very much been dealing with the impact of the decisions, or sorry, the amendments to the legislation, the first couple of tranches. And we're seeing that across all sectors, predominantly in enterprise bargaining. So had a look at the Fair Work General Manager's report from 2024, and that indicates that bargaining's up by about, agreement approvals are up by about 5%. And so there's a number of reasons for that. I think that's kind of post-COVID delay, people coming back into agreement making, the threat of multi-employer agreements being imposed on employers, and so them bringing potentially forward their own bargaining strategies. The termination of zombie agreements and kind of employers working out how to best kind of come up with new solutions that are going to suit their purpose. I think what's probably the most interesting, though, about that is that it's not so much the agreements that have been approved, but the number of employees that are now covered by those agreements. So it's currently sitting at about 2.2 million workers, and that's a 5-year high in terms of coverage. So I think the ALP would be very happy with that in terms of that more people are ending up under an enterprise agreement than kind of before these amendments were in place. And we're seeing that across a range of sectors, but also particularly in terms of supported bargaining areas, so childcare, hospitality. So there's a couple of applications, one in South Australia for fast food, and I expect to see those continue as well. One of the challenges, of course, that goes with enterprise bargaining is protected industrial action. So the figures I saw from the ABS, that was 293,000 lost days of work since 2022. So it'll be an interesting discussion come the tripartite conference, where productivity and kind of lost productivity is going to be a kind of key factor there. And sorry, one other figure I was just going to quickly mention is that about 47,000 of those days are directly related to the construction industry. So I think that's a fair assumption that that is a direct relationship with the loss of a specific regulator in the construction industry after the ABCC has been removed.
Okay. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, it's an interesting environment, isn't it, to see the impacts or see the results of the changes in legislation starting to come through and seeing the impacts of that. So thank you. Jamie, your intro. The Workplace Strategy Group advises clients on many different areas, and your team is doing lots of different things for clients. What are some of the things that are really standing out for you at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Belinda. Good morning, everyone. The end of the financial year is always a good opportunity to reflect on the employment dynamics that we deal with, and we've definitely seen a number of issues that come through that we think will shape employment. Notably, workforce participation is up, and quoting here, Australia recorded its highest ever workforce participation rate of 67.3%. Probably down to a couple of things. Belinda talked before about the employment in the public sector, so government and government-funded employment. Migration's in there, but what else is in there is older Australians. More and more we're seeing people that are towards the end of their career either staying in employment or returning to employment, and we're also seeing younger people move into the workforce sooner through casual and part-time work. So probably because of cost of living pressure, I would say, for those people. But one of the challenges that brings for employers is, for the first time ever, we're seeing 5 generations of people working together. And that brings challenges around communication styles, technology adoption, and general work expectations. If you imagine on one end of the scale, you've got people later in their career who have come from a career model where you join one employer and you stay with that employer. Wellness is not a responsibility of their employer, and their expectation is that when you're in a meeting, you don't use your phone. On the other end of that scale, you've got younger people coming in who are very interested in what employers are doing around the community and governance and policies. There is an expectation that the employer will look after their wellness. And of course, they want to sit there and take notes on their phones. So, it does bring with it a lot of challenges to employers, but also brings a lot of opportunities as well through diversity of experience and learnings and perspectives, and the opportunity for cross-generational mentoring and collaboration. So there's some of the opportunities for employers. From a trends perspective, what we're kind of seeing is, hybrid work is still there. It's not going away. And the challenges of employers who want to get their employees back into the office. It particularly becomes messy. We've had one situation where an organisation being acquired by another organisation, and the acquiring company wanted all the employees to now come into the office. And of course, the acquired employees have spent years working, in some cases 100% at home, in some cases in other states. So very, very problematic for employers. One of the other themes is wellbeing, of course, the increased awareness of mental health in the workplace, work-life balance, the obligation on employers to really they can't take a back seat when it comes to the wellness of their employees. They must play an active role. Technology integration is up there, the use of automation, AI. The challenge for employers is to use it in a way that increases collaboration and productivity. Compliance is not going away. Compliance with employment instruments, awards, paying conditions, annualised salaries. The challenge for employers is to be vigilant and be forewarned about any changes. For example, the pay cycle superannuation that's coming in at the end of this year, into this financial year. And workforce modelling, all these things flow into the challenge for employers of getting the right people in the right jobs at the right time. And considering that, you are going to have people retiring, you are going to have technology to consider as well. But I think one of the other aspects I want to quickly talk about is 2 areas that employers are going to struggle with challenge, or to be challenged with balancing, and that is respect at work versus the personal opinions of some of their employees. And some of you will be aware of a recent case that took place down here in Victoria with a gentleman by the name of Turner, Mr. Turner. He was a street cleaner at a local Victorian council, and he was dismissed after robustly questioning the acknowledgement of country during a standard toolbox meeting. So the matter was investigated. The employee was show caused, but ultimately he was terminated for serious misconduct, with the employer stating disrespectful conduct and undermining cultural safety. Now, Mr. Turner ran an unfair dismissal, and he was successful there. It was found that the termination was harsh, unjust, and unreasonable, and that his comments were a spontaneous expression of personal opinion and not serious misconduct. So as such, it was deemed that there wasn't really a valid reason for the termination. So the challenge that this case brings for employers is probably four things. One is freedom of expression, freedom of opinion. Employees are going to have different views and different opinions. The second thing they need to consider here is the balance, the role and applicability of cultural protocols in the workforce. Employers need to really be careful as to when they do it, how they do it, and how they communicate it. The importance of procedural fairness and substantive fairness. So, does the punishment suit the crime? Is ever present, and of course, balancing the impact on people. The different opinions, different views will have different impacts on different people within the workplace. So it's hard for employees to balance those matters, those issues, and it's going to be a challenge for them. So in summary, more generations working together brings with it challenges, but brings with it opportunities. Stay compliant, stay on top of your award and your instruments and your annualised salaries, and keep a close watch on those. Cultural challenges, ages, nationalities, cultures that need to be carefully managed and considered, and support employee wellbeing. Very, very important that employers take an active role in this. And we've seen an increase in the awareness of psychosocial health and safety in the workplace, which is where I'll be passing back to Belinda to hand over to Leith.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. There is a minefield at the moment. There's a lot of different moving parts for employers. So yeah, don't envy many of our clients who are trying to grapple with these multiple issues. Leith, your area has been one of the most rapidly developing areas for Mapian. The whole area of psychosocial risks, psychological health and safety. And you've been helping clients on some pretty interesting projects. There's quite a lot of interesting work happening in this space at the moment. Why don't you start following on from Jamie, just give us an overview of your observations about what's happening and some of the things we've been working with clients on.
Yeah, thanks, Belinda. And yeah, Jamie's already flagged, this increase in expectations for employers around mental health and well-being, and I think that's increasing from a compliance perspective, but also from, as Jamie talked about, particularly younger people are having a growing expectation that this is something that is a bit more open in workplaces, that it is discussed a bit more. It's definitely a huge area of focus for all of our clients at the moment. I think a year ago we were still at a webinar like this. I would probably be saying, are you aware of the code of practice? Are you aware of the legislation in this space? However, I think we're well and truly moved past this, and we've really witnessed like a really massive kind of growth in this area, and also just lots of maturity development in organisations in this space as well, sort of going from almost being completely unaware to really actively engaging in this space as well. I think some of the things we're really seeing is the regulators are really ramping up across the country in psychosocial. Probably the gold standard for that is Safe Work New South Wales, where they are very clearly and strategically signalling what's going to be happening in the psychosocial space. And I think they're just the first cab off the rank, really, in terms of what the regulators are going to be expecting across the country. We're seeing, again, in New South Wales, but also in other states as well, the appointment of psychosocial specific inspectors, which is a really interesting area that we're seeing, like, quite a lot of folks that are going to be conducting psychosocial inspections and doing that in a rigorous way. So I think we've definitely seen an increase in PIN notices, performance improvement notices, and that's something we're starting to see quite a lot more in terms of the work that we're asked to support, is around, we have this PIN notice, and can you support us, because we may not have what we need internally or the expertise we need internally to deal with this. I don't think anyone's asking me as much, is this flavour of the month anymore? Probably a year ago, people might be like, is this just flavour of the month? Is this going to go away, all this mental health stuff? I think it's fairly clear now that it's not flavour of the month, and it's very much seen as a critical component of an employer's obligations around workplace health and safety, but also just around looking after the mental health of their well-being as well, and not creating harm. So those are the kind of things. We're definitely getting work across all the different sort of 4 areas of the psychosocial risk management cycle as well, a cycle that probably many of you will be familiar with now. So we're getting work in the area of identifying hazards, so things like culture and team reviews, but using more a psychosocial framework. We've actually done some reviews that are actually very large, and a lot of those are looking at things like conduct. So we can certainly see the psychosocial coming in there. Something we're getting a lot of in this space is actually looking at workplace investigations, but the looking more at the psychosocial hazards that may be associated with that investigation. And I'd say that's one of the fastest growing inquiries that we're getting, is around how do we conduct, we're good at conducting workplace investigations, but how do we do that in a psychosocially informed way, or make sure we're assessing hazards as a part of that. Just a couple of other interesting areas, I guess, in terms of assessing risks. We're seeing a lot of, so I've sort of been asked to be a SME on psychosocial investigations now, where there might have been a workplace health and safety incident, and they're investigating that. The safety team might be investigating that from a psychosocial perspective, and then supporting the organisation to identify and implement controls in that scenario. There's all sorts of things organisations are doing in terms of the control risks part of the risk management cycle. I've already mentioned the PIN notices, which are really starting to come through now. But also, lots of capability uplift, like organisations are really starting to invest more in things around performance conversations and mental health. Respectful workplaces training is a really big area that we get a lot of inquiries and work in. And yeah, I think boards across the board are taking a much stronger interest in this topic, and so a lot of the work that we're getting now is almost a flow down from board inquiries or board requests. And probably the more interesting thing, just as a final comment, is around we're getting a lot more audits, psychosocial audits, and this can be anything in relation to sort of more a current state kind of audit, or I've actually partnered now with internal audit teams as a psychosocial SME, where their internal audit team is actually doing a audit more on that sort of the infrastructure or the policy and aligned with the code of practice. So wanting to know, and again, that's often coming now from boards around, are we compliant with the code of practice around psychosocial? So that's probably just, there's a lot going on, but that's probably enough from me, I reckon, Belinda.
Yeah, no, that's great, Leith. And I think that we've seen quite a movement now in terms of boards and directors becoming aware of their obligations, the board of directors' obligations, and the business's obligations in this area. So I agree with you. From the discussions that I've had, a lot of it is being driven by boards and executive groups who want to ensure compliance and obviously creating the best possible workplace and trying to avoid risks in this area. So interesting, you're definitely seeing that as well. And I know you've spoken at a few Institute of Company Directors events in this area. Okay, so let's start. I've got a few questions to start to ask the group. So please, as I mentioned earlier, as we go through, please, if there's anything specific you want to ask, just put it in the Q&As and Joe will let me know, or come back to us later after this webinar. So Ben, let's have a bit of a chat about the same job, same pay. Obviously, it's a topic of frequent discussion. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of what does this actually mean? We're starting to get contracting companies starting to contact us a bit more about some of the confusion in this area. What do you think is, some of the latest developments in this area, and what about this recent BHP decision?
Yeah, thanks, Belinda. This issue's probably been a little bit of a sleeper for or at least the first couple of applications that were made. It was fairly obvious which way it was likely to go, and it seemed like it wasn't going to have significant on-flow effects to other employers or other industries. The BHP decision that you reference really has turned that on its head and created a lot of uncertainty. So for people that aren't necessarily familiar with this amendment, the Commission is now empowered to make a regulated pay order, effectively kind of colloquially referred to as same job, same pay, where a labour hire company provides labour to an entity that has an enterprise agreement. So the requirement is that the labour hire company needs to match the pay conditions of the host employer. And clearly this was a key platform of the ALP and particularly the union movement to try and prevent employers from undercutting their strength in bargaining by having an alternative that they could use to source labour. Now, at the time that the bill was put forward, there was an exemption which was sought and obtained that the orders couldn't be made against a services provider. And I think the working assumption was that if you weren't a recognised labour hire company, then you were a services provider, and there was a fair degree of flexibility that you wouldn't kind of outside of that. And that's one of the things that the BHP decision, and it's referred to the BHP decision, sorry, I should just quickly clarify, because there was two entities, operational services maintenance, operational services production, which are BHP entities. But there were also 3 or 4 other labour hire companies that were caught up, and the Commission dealt with all of the applications together. What the full bench has clearly said is that it is not going to be persuaded by a services agreement that says an entity is a services provider. It will look behind the reality of the contract arrangements to see what the substantive truth is of that relationship. So very similar to what we've seen in the kind of the way that the Commission is dealing with kind of whether somebody's an independent contractor or an employee. The kind of the clothing doesn't so matter so much as kind of the essence of the relationship. And in this particular case, particularly as it pertains to BHP, the full bench looked at a number of different things, like what was the proportion of labour as a part of the service arrangement? Was there amendments to the contract based on whether they could provide the service with less labour? What was the supervision? Was it supervision that was by the contractor, or was it by the host employer? what's the best way to put it? Who provided the equipment and who maintained the equipment. Also, it looked at a particular issue, which I think is going to be of concern to a number of our clients, which was if the host employer provided specialised services, like a specific skill set, engineers, maintenance, whatever it might be, then that does potentially undermine the view that the purported contractor is in fact a contractor. They might be a labour hire provider. So that will be one of the indicia that the Commission is going to look at as well. Ultimately, the conclusion was that the two OS entities were labour hire providers, even though they did other things. And as such, the Commission was prepared to make the order that the same job, same pay arrangements would apply to them. In regards to the other entities or the other businesses more in the labour hire sector, I should say, there is a requirement that the Commission consider whether it's fair and reasonable to make the order. And one of the interesting takeaways that the Commission has given us is that it is not going to be persuaded by the potential on-cost impact to the labour hire company and whether that disrupts enterprise agreements that they have in place or contractual arrangements that they have in place. It's highly unlikely that those are going to be persuasive. It's very much going to be around that this is beneficial legislation for the benefit of employees. And if an entity is a labour hire provider, then and an order is sought, then it's very likely that that order will be made. What are the practical implications? It's a lot less clear now who was a service provider or a contractor and who was a labour hire company. And so we would expect that there'll be a lot more litigation around that as more claims are made. I think the things that contractors in particular should be focusing in on is making sure that to the degree that they can possibly do so, they're operating at arm's length from the entity that they're providing those services to. So they're maintaining the supervision of their employees. They're undertaking their own maintenance and managing their own equipment, that they're, if there's disciplinary issues, if there's day-to-day supervision, that's coming from the contractor and not the host employer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting area because it's just caused more confusion rather than more clarity. And
we do think that it will extend out into other industries as well. Obviously, that this has been a particular amendment that the MEU had sought, and they jumped straight onto using it. I expect that we will start to see that other unions, particularly in hospitality, I think that's an area where there's real problems where it may be a catering company, but really what they're providing is labour. Now, that's going to be a concern for those entities.
Yeah, definitely. And in the newspaper yesterday, it was reported that the Minerals Council had lodged a complaint against to the Fair Work Ombudsman in relation to the ETU writing to a number of resources employers nationally to put them on notice that they believed they were breaching the Act as a result of this decision. So it's not going to go away, definitely. Thanks, Ben. Leith, I might just go to you because there has been a question that's come in. Can the panel talk to what they are seeing regarding organisations linking wellbeing initiatives and psychosocial hazard code compliance? Got any thoughts on that one?
Sorry, say that one again, Belinda.
Can the panel talk to what they are seeing regarding organisations linking wellbeing initiatives and psychosocial hazard code compliance?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think where we've come from in this space is a few years ago, I think organizations were focused more on sort of mental health, like that sort of the well-being kind of angle. But now there's kind of a deeper level of requirement under the code and under the regulations to be more I guess, proactive around mental health and not just wait for, I guess, well-being initiatives, if that's what the question relates to, that there's a requirement about, I guess, more rigorous or systemic workplace design or aspects that are going to support psychosocial well-being. But in saying that, I think well-being initiatives are still important in that picture. I think there's been and again, I'm not quite sure whether I'm fully getting the full question, but there's been a lot of, sort of content through social media and that sort of thing around we can't just offer fruit bowls or yoga classes and things like that to people. I think that's absolutely true. Like you're not going to improve worker mental health through just well-being activities. However, I think those things are still important. I wouldn't throw them out, but there's a requirement now, I think, under workplace health and safety legislation and the codes of practice to more rigorously look at what is happening around psychosocial. And a lot of that's around things like more best practice, sort of job design, culture, systems, processes, things like that, in addition to those well-being initiatives.
Yeah. Okay, not enough just to have the well-being. You need the total picture. Okay, thank you. I hope that's answered that person's question. We will go on. There has been a couple of other questions, but I'll just move on now to asking, actually, Leith, I might just continue with you. This is obviously an area that's changing so rapidly, and as we can see from the questions coming through, is definitely an area that employers are keeping their eye on and trying to be cognizant of what's happening, of what other people are doing in this space. You've talked about, we've had a number of discussions internally about giving employers greater opportunity to collaborate nationally as a professional community in the psychosocial area, because there's nothing like that happening at the moment. Can you just give your thoughts on that? And then we're going to go to our first poll.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think given the newness of this area, I think a lot of the clients that I have, and even just friends and colleagues in workplaces as well, are also really grappling with what to do. Like we're really sort of on uncharted territory with the whole psychosocial space. And something that I've been thinking about or talking to people about recently is about potentially whether there'd be interest in sort of setting up communities of practice for clients within, or people from our client organisations to sort of collaborate or to share, maybe to share experiences in this space as well as innovative practices. So yeah, and I think what a lot of my clients are finding is they don't necessarily have psychosocial experts internally to their organizations. I think we'll see that shift over the next few years. But yeah, I think just sort of flagging this idea about whether people would be interested in sort of communities of practice in this space is probably something I've been looking at.
Okay. All right, so Jo, we might just go into the first poll and we can continue to have the discussion while the first poll is up. If any of you have an interest in this area, we'd be really interested to understand whether you'd be interested in joining or getting some more information about this. So please complete the poll. And while you're taking a few minutes to have a look at it, we will continue some of the questions. Sarah, you and I have discussed recently how slow the federal government and the department has been in some areas this year. You know, normally, what's the government doing with migration levels? They haven't released any program planning levels as yet. Normally, we would see that before 1 July, and I know that's been a challenge for your team and our clients. What do you think's happening?
So thanks, Belinda. So yeah, the migration planning numbers have not yet been released. The government are planning a 4-year cycle as opposed to the current 12-month plan. But we believe the program planning levels will remain at around 185 for the program year. And this 4-year cycle change aims to better align migration with long-term infrastructure, housing, service needs, providing a more strategic approach to Australia's immigration framework. The Migration Institute of Australia CEO, Peter, was mentioned in an article a few weeks ago saying this is a good sign for employers and businesses who are facing skill shortages and for Australian citizens wishing to reunite with their loved ones. So with the net overseas migration numbers projected to track downwards towards normal and sustainable levels, the government has made a sensible decision in not reducing the permanent migration program. It was going to be too difficult for them to pull numbers out of parent and partner, where we're already seeing backlogs of 24 months processing for partner visas. The contributory parent visa are taking about 8 to 9 years to process. They're keeping families apart. We've already noticed over the last year the change to the student visa program, and there has been talks of capping the program, which hasn't happened yet. But there's been so many student visa refusals, it's now backlogging the review tribunal as well, and there's going to be years wait for student visas to get their visas reviewed. So look, I think they're taking their time in making a decision on what they're going to do, because it's so, I guess, highly politicized at the moment, and there's a lot of pressure on them to make a decision and try and reduce the net overseas migration numbers to, I guess, alleviate the pressure on infrastructure and housing, again, which seems to be, the migrants are blamed for the lack of housing when it's the lack of skill shortages we currently have, that we're pumping things out quick enough. We don't have the skill set here to do that. So it's definitely been interesting, but I think once they do make the announcement, I'm hoping it'll be a sensible one.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And Joe, we'll close that poll now. I presume you probably closed it already. So thank you for that. We'll come back to everyone with those results afterwards. So we don't have a lot of time left, and obviously there's so many questions. A couple of questions coming through, Ben, about what you were talking about in terms of that BHP decision. And I think one of the questions was, has the BHP decision effectively marked the beginning of the end for labour hire entities and contractors within the mining industry? And then another person's asked about labour hire increasing the employer's rate. So yeah, there's a lot of things happening there, a lot of variables. You got a quick comment on that before we move on to the last few questions?
Yeah, I guess quickly, has it killed off labour hire in the mining industry? You don't have to meet the rates of your host employer until there's an order that's been made against you. So there is still scope to practice, to operate in that area. But I think the MEU have made it very clear their view on this, and they've obviously gone after a couple of the very big players first. And I think then they will start putting pressure on labour hire providers across the sector. So it's troubling times, I think. And obviously then that has to factor into rates that those businesses kind of charge.
And what we're actually seeing as well is it's not labour hire companies as such, it's contractors that are getting advised, and there's some challenges happening in respect to contractors as well, not just traditional labour hire. So interesting times. So Okay, all right. We only have 5 minutes left, so let's just see if we can wrap up with a few questions. Jamie, I do want to say you and I went to the Australian Financial Review Workplace Summit in Sydney a few months ago. Great conference. Would definitely recommend it to anybody who's looking for a really big picture overview of what's happening in the workplace space with a lot of international speakers and experts as well. But one of the things, there was a lot of discussion, was the 5G workforce, which is obviously the 5 generations. Do you just want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think it's the key. It's the challenges for employers. That's and like I said before, it's the way different generations think. It's the way the different generations work, and it's their expectations. The challenge for employees is how they can potentially, use these the opportunity that these people bring is clear communication. So jargon-free, clear communication. Don't need to use emojis to address the more junior people. Just clear communications. Foster that cross-generational collaboration. So you can potentially look at mentoring programs where you pair up a more junior person with a more senior person. Project teams, mix them up so you've got different age groups within there, and essentially partner those people together. Flexible work arrangements always helps in meeting their expectations. Learning and development is a big one. Encourage that lifelong learning. A lot of people later in their career, this is how I do it. I come to work, I do my job, I go home. Maybe help them sort of upskill themselves a little bit in maybe some of the technology. But importantly, celebrate it. Like I talked about it being challenges, but I have also talked about the opportunities there. And I think that's, you've got a range of perspectives, a range of views, and I think you should encourage that respect and that curiosity and communication and collaboration across those different age groups.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Jamie. All right, we've only got two minutes left. I am going to give you, Ben, 1 minute, which is going to be a real challenge because of the topic, but it's just coming up, this federal government looking at these penalty rates and what that means, and we might send some more information out later on after this webinar about it. But what's happening?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Belinda. I guess the first thing to give people some reassurance about is that this doesn't affect enterprise bargaining. It's very much an award-based issue because I think there was some concerns that it would be kind of changes to the boot test. So that's not happening. People might recall that prior to about 2020, there were a number of awards that had salary absorption clauses in. So as long as the employer paid over the highest rate of the award, usually with a set premium, often 25%, then certain provisions of the award didn't apply. So hours of duty, penalty rates, overtime allowances, etc. In about 2020, most of the awards had an annualized wage arrangement that was introduced, and the key issue about that was that it had an underpinning boot test. So the employer had to explain to the employee how they would be better off under that arrangement than directly under the awards. The issue has come to prominence because there's currently an application before the Commission brought by the Australian Retailers Association to introduce reintroduce a salary absorption clause for the General Retail Industry Award. And again, it would be high rate plus 25%, and those penalty rates wouldn't apply. Now, the ALP is fundamentally opposed to this because there is no boot test or safety net, and so that it perceives that employees can be worse off. I think it's an interesting proposed change because the application is currently before the Commission. It hasn't been determined yet. I think the ALP perceive that there is some risk that that decision will be made that facilitates its entry, and then other industry associations will make the same sort of changes. So the effect of the amendment would be that those salary absorption type arrangements just wouldn't be permitted in awards.
Right. Okay. So that's going to be a bit of a wait and see what happens in that space too.
Yeah,
we'll be talking
very
about
much so.
that in 12 months' time, no doubt. Well, it is 10 o'clock, everyone. We could keep talking about this for another hour or two. We've got so many questions that are still unanswered. Please, if you have any questions, send them through. Before you sign off today, we do have a little bit of a poll at the end, which talks about some of the areas you might like some additional information in. So please, if you could just take 30 seconds just to complete that poll. It takes you through industrial relations, psychological, health and safety, etc. It takes you through a number of different areas. It should only take you a minute or two. So thank you very much, everybody. We will continue to do some of these webinars over the next 12 months. We're looking to do more of them, so just let us know what you'd like. And thank you to my panelists and Joe for dealing with all of our technical aspects today. And we will see you all soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.